Great. Thank you, Bill, and welcome. Good morning, my fellow Rotarians. I'm happy to welcome you to our fourth District 5030 Race Matters to Rotary Forum, an opportunity for regional Rotarians to consider our shared commitments to advance racial justice, promote social, economic, health, and educational equity, to stand against hate and prejudice in all its forms, and to transform our intents into action. I will begin with an acknowledgement that we work, live, and play on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, and then across our district on the traditional lands of the Tulalip tribe, the Sioux, the Chippewa, and other tribes whom we acknowledge. Our forum today has several components. First, we will welcome Rotary International Director and Vice President-elect Valarie Wafer for an interview followed by participant questions. Then we will have a lightning round breakout session addressing race awareness, followed by a panel of District 5030 Rotarians sharing what their clubs are currently doing to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we'll close the morning with one more breakout session where each of you will have an opportunity to consider what next steps you'll take back to your club for this year and for the coming Rotary year. So on behalf of all the Rotarians assembled here from District 5030 and many joining us from District 5100, I'd like to welcome you, Valarie. We first met when you addressed Pacific Northwest Pets. It was a few years ago, I think. Your clear and compelling style, your warmth and care shining through, and your passion for Rotary's diversity initiatives left an impact on all of us who were present. For those who may not be familiar with Director Valarie's extensive Rotary resume, let me briefly share that Valarie joined Rotary in 2005. She served as governor of District 7070, which encompasses the Greater Toronto area, back in 2013 and 2014. She is now an elected member of the Rotary International Board, serving a term from 2020 to 2022, and she is the champion for Rotary's DEI efforts. Additionally, Valarie will serve as Rotary Vice President to the incoming Rotary International President, Shekhar Mehta, starting on July 1st. Outside of Rotary, Valarie had a 27-year career as a restaurant owner in Toronto, a franchisee of the iconic Canadian brand, Tim Hortons. Valarie and I are going to have a brief interview, and then she's agreed to answer your questions, so please post them in the chat, and we'll get to the questions as soon as our little interview is over. So again, welcome, Valarie. I'm going to start by asking you to tell us your Rotary story. We all have one, and we'd love to hear yours.
Wow, okay. First of all, I want to congratulate you on these conversations that you're having. You know, this is exactly how we change culture in Rotary, and it's all about our journey, and it's our journey of conversations about education and awareness. And so I'm really thrilled to be with you here today. My Rotary story, well, as you mentioned, District Governor Kathy, I joined Rotary in 2005. And I didn't know what Rotary was. It's a typical story until somebody asked me to attend a meeting. I was looking to give back. We have two daughters who are now grown, but at the time, you know, I'd been their hockey coach, I'd been their soccer, you know, involved in brownies and Girl Guides and everything. But they had gone on to high school, and I thought it was time for me to give back in a meaningful way that I found value and that I really felt like I was getting to know my community. So again, didn't know what Rotary was. Joined a club, the Rotary Club of Whitby, that was in its 75th year. And this club had a really rich history of international service. And so within my club, there was the chair of a district committee that was called RADAR, which was the Rotary Action Development of Responses for AIDS Awareness. I know I didn't get all of that right. But anyways, it was all about education around AIDS awareness. And 1 year later, I found myself in Kenya at an orphanage with AIDS orphans and seeing, you know, the work that need, you know, to rebuild. And so I was hooked, right? Here I was locally doing and finding out all this work that's going on. And then a year later, find myself actually visiting some of these projects. And of course, I've continued during my Rotary journey to get involved as much as I can. I've been a vocational training team leader, still in touch with my team, really impactful. but really I became a global citizen. And you know, we all say we get more from Rotary than we could ever hope to give. And I know that through our service, we all have similar stories. But my journey to leadership was honestly, I think, something else that we are all responsible for, and that is recognizing, cultivating, and encouraging leaders. When I look back to my journey of taking on different roles, it's always because somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, I believe in you, and I know you can do this job. And you know, initial reaction was, I just want to be a club Rotarian, but my world has changed so much, and I thank Rotary every day for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to pick up on that theme because you've inspired so many with your work globally. But what inspires you specifically to be a change maker right now? Because our sense is Rotary is going through some significant transformations in our history. Every organization needs to kind of evolve and change. But what inspires you to be at the forefront of one of the big changes that Rotary is trying to
I assume you're referencing diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you for clarifying.
Well, you know, so diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been part of my story, of myself, before I even realized that it was. So my husband, we've been married 35 years, been together since I was 16 years old with this partner. And my husband was born deaf. And all throughout his life, he faced obstacles of not being able to participate in things because the deaf person might get hurt. The misinformation of disabilities and what that means and how it impacts our life. And so when we bought our business, we hired people with disabilities in every position, including senior management. And what happened was we built this inclusive culture where people wanted to come work for us because we were hiring people with disabilities, and it really resonated with them. When you think that 20% of the world's population has a disability, but 52% are impacted by direct family, brothers, sisters, etc., with people with disabilities, it is so smart in your business to make sure that you're including this population. And so we had people, customers, and others go out of their way to come to our locations because we represented the community that they lived in. And so when they walked through the door and they saw their children, their niece, their nephew, others being represented, it really improved our business. It certainly improved our experience. And looking back on our 25-year career, we sold our business 3.5 years ago. Honestly, that's the thing that we are most proud of. And we didn't set out to do it, it just organically happened. And that's what this journey of diversity, equity, and inclusion is all about. And so I believe so strongly in giving greater opportunities to underrepresented people who are not currently in Rotary. And so when the board had a special meeting in July that was just on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and President Holger-Nack asked me to chair the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, I have to say, it's pretty daunting. I mean, I'm so excited to be part of this conversation today and know that your district is very much committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we also know it's going to take years of a culture change. And these conversations that we're having today are really encouraging and inspiring to me because we know that it's the groundswell conversations that happen at the local level that will eventually change and will work towards changing our culture in Rotary.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Let's get specific. We have all been following Rotary International President Holger's statements against racism and injustice, and they resonate with us. Can you tell us more about what Rotary is doing or will be doing to truly become an anti-racist organization?
Sure, and I'm really glad you mentioned President Holger's statement, which of course was posted on Rotary International's Facebook page in February. What I love about that statement was the three parts of the statement. First of all, acknowledging that there is no place for racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, you know the statement. But what was really groundbreaking and really important was the next statement where he said, "We do not believe this is a political stance. And we do believe that we need to be having these conversations within our organization." And I think that that was a really, really important statement. And the response on social media was incredible by Rotarians and Rotaractors and potential Rotarians who were really impressed with our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and willing to spell it out to that degree. Then of course the statement, the second part that was important was it reinforced our core values and the strength that inclusion brings and diversity brings to our organization. But the third part is almost as impactful as the first part. And that says we have a lot of learning to do. It's a journey that's going to take us a while. We're going to have some deep reflections, some challenging conversations, and we're going to have more people speaking up as upstanders, right? And this is how we're going to change our culture. So I believe, to answer your question, that it all begins with education and awareness, and it includes being able to amplify, racialized voices and listen to the lived experience, stories and speakers, to learn how to be an upstander. It all takes that self-awareness of who we are, what we need to learn, who's not present, and have those conversations and be on that journey. So, racism is one part of DEI. It's a very important part because it's all about our social equity as well, and it's the conversation that's happening in North America right now. So I really do congratulate you for these conversations.
Thank you. You recently distributed a diversity, equity, and inclusion survey. In fact, I think it closed earlier this week, and many of us participated in that. Can you tell us when the results are going to be announced and how they're going to be utilized?
Sure. So the task for the DEI task force was to bring recommendations to the board by the end of this Rotary year. And we were very, very intentional when we put together this task force. We wanted to make sure it had representation of lived, professional, and passionate experience to this topic. We also were very intentional to make sure it did not have a North American lens. This isn't a North American problem, although it is the voices that are probably the loudest in our media right now, and in our homes and in our clubs. So when we got the task force together, and we know we have this short period of time to June 30th, we hired an outside external consulting agency, and that's PwC. We knew from the beginning that we had to provide a benchmark of where we are today so that we can measure any success going forward in the next years. And we know that President-elect Shekhar Mehta has a focus on empowering girls, and we know that President nominee Jennifer Jones is going to make DEI a part of her focus for her year as well. The board actually in March approved the DEI task force to continue until the end of 2023, at which point it will probably be operationalized and should be operationalized within our country, or our company. So knowing that we had to find out who we are today, we're utilizing PwC to launch the survey you mentioned, Kathy. That was the first time we've actually been able to ask questions, and this is using their expertise, questions around ethnicity and race. And also the Rotary experience at the club level. Do you feel safe? Do you feel you can be considered for leadership? Do you feel you can show up as your true authentic self? And so we're really excited that the survey was launched. Again, we made sure that it was global. We're making sure that the response rates are typical for the areas. And actually I reached out to a few areas that only had a 2% response rate, and talked to my fellow directors to ask them, can we send this out again under your name? Because you're the director of the area and people may respond. So for us, it was really important to hear from everyone. So yes, the survey just closed, and we are now working on focus groups and leadership interviews with PwC. And then PwC, the other service that they're offering us, is they're going to do the analytics, and they're going to measure the results of these surveys by their benchmarking of their global offices and their global experience. And we thought that was really important as well, that we didn't want to have our bias or stereotypes or judgments or assumptions come into it. So it was really important that we had a third party look at this. Those results will be ready in early May, recognizing that some of them were open-ended questions and they take a little bit longer to disseminate the information. But again, we wanted to give Rotarians that opportunity to share as much as they were willing to. So these will all help shape our recommendations to the board in June. And then because we've been given the lead to continue this committee, and I'm really pleased that each of the committee members have accepted to stay, their commitment to stay on the committee. So this information is going to be used going forward, but we're waiting for those analytics, and we're waiting for the focus groups and the interviews.
Great, thank you. Just a follow-on question, Deb. Do you see a point in time where Rotary will track more demographic information to be able at the club or district level to have a clearer sense of what the diversity is within a particular region?
You know, that's a really great question, but it's a tough one. And I can tell you that even if there's 2 Rotary clubs in one city, that even the demographics may be very different in their geographical area. And that is why the task force and I continue to say that we can provide the framework, we can provide toolkits, we can provide the forum for conversations. But honestly, DEI looks different around the world, and it looks different in our own communities. So it really takes that intentional conversation that you're having with your task force at the club level or the district level.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious, because I'm frequently asked, tell me about, people are asking me, how diverse is our district? And I can only speak in terms of gender diversity right now, because that's the major.
The other thing I'll add that you have as a tool that we don't necessarily in Canada is census data. So you have access to demographic information, and we, through privacy, we don't have that.
Good, thank you. We are always interested in learning what others are doing. So I'm wondering if you could offer some examples of what clubs, particularly those in North America, but maybe there's some insights from clubs elsewhere in the world, what they've been doing to change their culture and practices to be more meaningfully inclusive and diverse.
You know, again, I'm really excited that right now they're taking a look at who's not at the table, who's not in the room, and asking themselves why, and really educating ourselves. So a lot of people are bringing in some great speakers to not just talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, although that's part of it. There's some really great presentations to talk about unconscious bias, privilege, how to be an upstander, because it really, we have to get comfortable in this conversation, and we have to be comfortable to be able to say, listen, I'm going to stop you right there. I don't agree with the conversation that's happening. I will offer this different perspective. Or do you realize that that is hurtful to the people that are in the room? But there are some districts and clubs that are really addressing some of the issues, again, that are very relevant to their area. And I'll talk a little bit about Halifax, Nova Scotia, and District 7820. And they've decided to do and have a committee at the district level on specifically on racism. And they have come out with an amazing toolkit. I'd be happy to share it with you. I've got permission to share it, but they have come out with mission statements and resource pages. They've been having educational webinars and really changing that conversation. I've actually asked one of the members of that district to be the liaison for me at the zone level, because what I'm seeing is we want to share those best practices. You know, we can't all be an expert in certain areas. We may not have lived experience. And so it's really important that we share best practices, resources, speakers on this journey. So there is, I would say that we're all probably at that acknowledgement stage, right? Where we know there's a problem, we're acknowledging it, that it is a problem. We want to try to resolve the issues, name it, and go forward. And it's about educating ourselves first. So I think there's varying degrees of where everybody is, but overall, I think most of us are at that acknowledgement that we need to do something about it.
Great. And we will definitely accept your offer to share what the Halifax, Nova Scotia Club District is doing. Our district was right at the heart of the move to admit women into Rotary back in the 1980s. And we're wondering if you see any lessons learned from that shift back in 1987 to admit and to welcome women, to make them feel like they belonged. Are there some lessons learned from that that might inform our efforts now as we look to further diversify our membership and welcome underrepresented groups?
You know, that's a really good question. It's probably the last time our organization had such a culture change. I was recently at a president-elect training, of course, virtually, and went into a breakout room with some individuals. And it was really interesting because there was two men who were going to be president-elect of their club, and they were in their 60s. And they immediately said, we were presidents. The last time we were president was when we were inviting women into Rotary. And it was just like, wow, you've seen both culture changes here. And so, you know what, there is some similarities in that, you know, when you want to invite someone into Rotary that isn't currently there, we don't just ask one Hispanic person, one Black person, one LGBTQ member. We, you know, it's not doing anyone favors. We need to build capacity. We need to invite them into a place that they can show up as their true authentic self and be welcomed. So, you know, that is a similarity to where we were when we were inviting women in. I think many of us might have had the experience in our corporate career or our, you know, Rotary journey that we were the only woman at the boardroom table, or we were and so we felt like, you know, it was on our shoulders to represent all women. And that's really not where we want to go in this DEI journey. The other part of it is, you know, gender is only one part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And DEI in general, and especially racism, extreme racism, also brings hatred and violence. And that's not something that women necessarily experienced when we were coming into Rotary. So there is a similarity, but I believe the conversation is a lot more complex in bringing in the underrepresented groups who are currently not here.
I think we can agree on that. One of the pillars of our Rotary ideals is our four-way test, and yet that's been in place for a long time, and we've still had racism in our organization. So how can we retool or refit the four-way test to address racism and some of the other discriminatory practices that are embedded in our organization?
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things I say is print out Holger's statement and print out our core values, print out our DEI statement and our four-way test, and use them to empower you during this journey in these conversations. But I love this question because I'm going to share that District 7820 in Halifax actually put racism to the four-way test. And so I'm going to share that with you because I think it's really great. So they call this countering anti-Black racism using the four-way test. And is it the truth? Learning the history of anti-Black racism and acknowledging the past is a necessary first step. Is it fair to all concerned? And they have coined this, say, taking an inventory of policies and projects to ensure they are fair to all concerned and can identify new opportunities and areas of growth. And I can share this with you, of course. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Projects can be improved through partnership and community assessments, and of course, bringing in partners in the work that we do. And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Together, we can build a path forward where Rotary and its projects are beneficial to all. So, you know, again, I think during these difficult conversations, we have some tools that we can use. And again, hearing from our leadership with such strong wording allows us to know that we have the support of Rotary International and the leadership to have these conversations.
Great, thank you. We've been investing time at the club level and at the district level through these forums to provide education, building, and a sense of urgency. Is there anything in particular you would recommend to us that we can do to advance Rotary's DEI efforts. We're, we're transitioning from the awareness and education to the next steps. In fact, that's the second half of today's program is to talk specifics. But if there's anything you can share with us that you think we here in the Pacific Northwest can do.
You know, it is a journey, and I talk about the journey all the time, and I talk about bringing people along on this journey. We cannot, changing culture doesn't come from policy. It comes from the conversations that we're having. Policy helps support the work we're doing, but we need to bring people along on this journey. And so it's not a push. It has to happen organically. These conversations that we're having are the first step. Every training program that I've been involved in since, I actually did a panel discussion at International Assembly for the district governor-elects. The Rotary Leader Training Institute is happening for our coordinators this week. I and a few others did a recording on DEI. Every president-elect training session I was on this spring, every district conference I'm asked to speak on, if I'm not speaking on DEI, somebody else is speaking on DEI. And this is exactly, a year ago, 2 years ago, and you know, maybe it was around the incidents that happened in the US 2 summers ago or a summer ago. And maybe that was the wake up we all needed. But a couple of years ago, this wasn't the topic that we were speaking about. And so the change that we're already seeing in the groundswell change in the conversations are really empowering to me and empowering to those who have felt. I was speaking to a Rotary Club recently, and I might have been speaking about DEI, but afterwards we were asked to stick around, asked if I would stick around and continue the conversation, and I did. And I'm going to share with you that a member who's Black spoke up after the meeting and shared his message that after 15 years of being in Rotary, with his Rotary family, his Rotary Club, he's never felt comfortable or truly accepted, and never felt he could speak up about his experience because he felt he would be judged or speaking out of turn. And he felt comfortable to speak up that day, and it was emotional. And his Rotary family was there on the Zoom screen, and you could almost see they were quite taken aback. And for me, I thought, bravo, first of all, for saying this. And also, it really just really solidified why we're doing this and why we're having these conversations. But 2 years ago, he wouldn't have spoken up and had that conversation. So, you know, there seems to be an urgency, but I think we need to bring people along on this journey. And again, I commend you for everything you're doing. This is so important.
Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we do have a sense of urgency. I am going to ask if there's anything else you would like to share with us, or something I haven't asked about yet, before we welcome the questions from our forum attendees. And I'll leave it open if it's on this particular DEI topic or anything else in the greater Rotary world you'd like to share with us. It's such an honor to have a director with us this morning.
Well, you know, it's a very exciting time to be on the board. You know, even before we ended up in this lockdown pandemic situation, we saw that there was change coming in Rotary, necessary change. We're 116 years old, and by nature, we don't like change. We're slow to change. And I think, you know, we've started the conversation about new innovative clubs and clubs that are centered on some of these really key topics that we're all passionate about. And I think our Rotary experience is changing. We're finding a way that we can find that value and also share our own passions and skill set. So, you know, the board has met 9 times this year versus our typical 4. We're doing some really important business. Yesterday and Thursday, we had 2 days of joint meetings with the TRF trustees. Sometimes we do that once a year or once every 2 years. We've done it 3 times this year. So the opportunities for change and the opportunities to move our organization forward is just incredible. And it's a really exciting time to be part of that.
Well, thank you so much for your service. We're grateful to you. We're going to transition now, and I'm going to invite Tony Ives a member of the University District Rotary Club, who's been monitoring the chat while you and I have been chatting, to bring forward the questions of our forum attendees. So Tony, I'm going to let Bill spotlight you and continue with some more questions for Valarie.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you. Good morning. Valarie, it's a pleasure to meet you. So I'll get right into the questions that have been asked. Adrian asked a question. How do you see this commitment to DEI being operationalized with youth programs like RILA?
Yeah, no, so we've broken into 3 work groups within the DEI task force, and we're looking at policy, we're looking at culture, we're looking at everything that impacts our participant experience. And you bring up a really great point. I mean, I can speak about interview panels when we talk about leadership at any levels. If our interview panels don't have representation, we're only ever going to promote leaders who look and think like us. And I think when it comes to RILA, I had a great conversation the other night with a Rotex Rotary group as well. This young people demand this conversation, right? I mean, they're not looking at diversity by race or ethnicity. They're looking at diversity of thought. And they demand equity in their jobs, in their participant experiences. And so I think that when it comes to RILA, I've had conversations with other people about, young people transitioning that have a different sexual orientation than male or female. Rotary International has actually just adjusted some of our identifiers so that it's not just male or female. When we did our DEI survey and we asked people right away to identify their gender, we made sure that male and female weren't the first 2 choices. We made sure we mixed it up, right? Because otherwise it looks like we're categorizing, and that's not the case. I know that we need to bring representation into our programs like RILA, like Rotex. Again, this conversation I had with Rotex, I said to them, you are going to a different country at 16 years old. You might have come from a small community, and you had, obviously, as we are all born with stereotypes and biases, and you found yourself in a country and had to really put all that aside and learn. And what you bring back to us is such important messaging. And I think we really need to reach out more to our youth programs.
Great. Just on a quick follow-up on that survey, what you mentioned in your presentation was you had some low response rates. You mentioned the 2% response rate for one club, and you finally sent it out in the name of the club. Was that effective?
So it wasn't a club, it was a region.
Oh,
so
okay.
some of our regions like South Korea and India typically don't respond well to surveys. And so we saw it as an opportunity for me to resend out that cover letter under my colleague directors' names that are from that area, so that if it came from the leadership of that area, they might be more comfortable responding.
Great.
We're waiting for them to come in.
Okay, great. This is a question from Carl. The Rotary International Survey has had open-ended questions. Inclusive behaviors was defined as ways in which leaders help all members, and that's in a capital, feel a sense of belonging. Why was this the focus of inclusion on members and not the general public or potential members? Also, seems there could be 2 inclusive efforts, internal as well as external.
And that's a great point. So we have a research department at Rotary International, and we didn't feel like we had the capacity to ask these questions in a way that followed all privacy laws around the world, which is why we hired PwC. But we have done through previous surveys, and we felt that we had some good data on people who have left Rotary and potential members who might participate in their experience or their perception of Rotary International. So we decided that this survey had to be us looking in the mirror. Who are we today? And that's why it was intentional that it was an internal survey.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is a question from Stan. Do you have a working definition of what being anti-racist means?
I do not. I can put you into the resource, which are extensive from District 7820, and I'm really happy to share that. I have more personally a broad view of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's my role as the chair of the task force. We have people on our committee that do have representation from underrepresented communities. And I think that was really important. At this point, the task force hasn't gotten into that detail. We are looking at making our policy more inviting. We're looking at our culture. We are looking at the Rotary experience in general terms. But again, I'm really happy to share those resources that Halifax has worked on, because I think you'll find it's very extensive.
Great, thank you. This is a question from Rochelle, and frankly, I think this question pops up a lot, has popped up a lot in this district over the last year. There is an outside perception that Rotary is not a welcoming place for younger professionals and people of color. What can we do to help share that we are on a journey and there is a place for more diverse members in Rotary?
You know, I think that socioeconomic piece is really important, and it's part of DEI that we don't always talk about. We are a membership organization. It brings privilege. We have to recognize that it is our privilege to be able to join and pay dues. That is excluding quite a few people from joining our organization. And you know, I think that this year of COVID has shown us that we have a really great opportunity to meet in different ways and to engage those in service and engage those in conversation. As far as, you know, I think that's a way that we can welcome young people who might not be able to afford Rotary. As far as welcoming the people that aren't there, I really think it comes down to our community partnerships, and it's working with the people in our community, developing those relationships, working side by side, participating in each other's activities, whether it's you know, a day, International Women's Day, or it's Pride celebrations. It's really important that we have representation and show that we are committed to this conversation and these relationships.
Okay, thank you so much. I believe that's all the question that we have in the forum, in the chat room. There is one more. So when there's an important topic like reparations for slavery, descendants of slavery, what do you recommend Rotary clubs do to avoid discussing such issues and are in a constructive way rather than a partisan way, to avoid being politically divisive?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And you know, Kathy gave a land acknowledgement when she started. And I think that many of our countries have history where we did not treat our Indigenous people properly. And I think that it all comes down to reconciliation before we can move on, and acknowledgement again that there is an issue. We need to acknowledge the past before we can move forward and make those changes. And you know, again, this is where powerful lived experience stories, in my opinion, really come in, because I can't put myself in somebody else's shoes that I haven't walked in. And we need to tell these stories in a positive and inspirational learning way, making reference to the past and where we need to go. We need to understand where everybody is coming from before we can move on. So, you know, I think that I had a conversation with, we have an organization, our Rotary Club of Toronto, that are called Honoring Indigenous People. And it's a really powerful group. And we know that there is, you know, we're all working towards the same goal of inclusion and equity. But their focus is on that reconciliation part. And I think that's really important.
Okay. Looks like we have plenty of time, so this is great. Carl asked a question, and it's really about demographics. So the club level, district, and RI level member demographic information and statistics are available via DACDB or the RI website. However, this only includes basic information about member age, member type, and member gender, binary. Could Rotary include statistics or information about member race or ethnicity to encourage clubs to be more diverse and become more self-aware of diversity or lack thereof within clubs? I'm going to just include that. I think you said PwC, you recognize that with the help of PwC, you're trying to get a benchmark. So I think that's what this question speaks to.
Yeah, no, we're trying to get a benchmark. I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to share demographic information down to the club and district level. There's so many privacy laws. And again, if you did the survey, you'll notice that it first of all asked you permission. Are you willing to answer these questions? And if you said no, the rest of the survey dropped away. And that is how you have to collect this information. In Germany, we weren't even allowed to launch the survey. That their GDPR restrictions are so strong. So again, I think it really takes getting out in your community. Looking at your demographics and knowing who isn't there.
Great, thank you so much. This is a question that comes from Al down in Portland. Our club has been intentional of inviting people of color to join our club. Several have, but a high percentage have not. And I believe it is because how we orient them or don't orientate them to Rotary. It could also be a cost, but that is not known up front. What orientation suggestions do you have for the clubs?
So I think that's a really great example and probably speaks to my previous example where that man was in Rotary for 15 years and never felt comfortable, and other Black members showed up only to leave. And you know, it hit me, Tony, just what you're saying, that, well, we're not educating our members. We're not allowing these conversations to happen. So when people don't feel comfortable, they don't feel like it's a safe space for them to say, listen, I don't appreciate the conversation. I'm not comfortable with the jokes or the lack of acknowledgement of who I am when I show up to my Rotary meetings. So until we actually see who we are and educate and bring in those speakers, that's what's going to happen. And I think it's an opportunity to actually go back to some of those members. And I know exit interviews are great in theory. They don't always happen when we're hurt personally. But I think if we are willing to have those real conversations and sit down and say, we recognize that we had this similarity to some of our members leaving, and it's really kind of opened our eyes to the fact that we are not maybe as inclusive as we'd like to be. What could we have done better? I mean, when we used to hire people with disabilities, we used to always think we knew what their capabilities were, and we were wrong every single time. And it took sitting down and asking them what their accommodation might be, how we needed to maybe adjust the job a little bit. But we also, sat down and had those real conversations with them. And as I said, we were wrong almost every single time.
Okay, that segues into Sally's next question. Can you give examples of not just recognizing, but celebrating each other's cultures?
Sure. I mean, I think we're, every single week or day of the month is a different religious holiday. I think that we need to look at how we're doing business in our Rotary Club. We're non-political and non-religious. And I've been at meetings where, you have to respect where I come from. And I know that we're different even around North America, but been asked to join hands for prayer. I can't tell you how uncomfortable that made me. It was one of the things that really attracted me to Rotary, is that we were not going to speak about religion and not speak about politics. So we have to be cognizant that when we invite people in and then do a Christian prayer, that's not being inclusive. And so I think, again, this is why I say we need to find out who we are today before we open the doors and invite people in and expect them to stay. Because and this is again one of the really big reasons why we hired an external firm. Because if we look in the mirror, we're just going to see what we've always seen, right? We're going to promote people in leadership who think like us and look like us because we don't understand how others are showing up. And so, sometimes we need that external, but we certainly need to have those conversations.
Great, thank you so much. Bill has a question. My club is in a bedroom community. Interesting, the demographics show that 23.9% of the population are foreign born. Majority are Asian, with a third being from Bangladesh. Do you have any ideas on how to reach this community of the foreign born population? And I'm going to just add to that question. You mentioned Canada doesn't have census data. How do you do it?
I think it just happens organically, but I love that question because I have a really great Bangladeshi example. So Toronto is a very, very diverse community, as you know. And so we recognize that we have one of the biggest populations of Bangladeshis outside of Bangladesh. And we had tried to bring them into Rotary. We tried to bring them, have these conversations. We would meet with them. We realized we needed a champion. We needed somebody of that origin to come with us and speak to them. And they've been members in Bangladesh, but didn't want to join Rotary in Canada and in Toronto. And so they end up forming their own cultural group. And honestly, if you go visit that group, you swear you were, in Bangladesh, in their country. And it's so exciting to share those cultures. And so you could say, well, that's not truly being inclusive. But what happens organically is that we start to visit that club. They start to get involved in district committees. They start to put their name forward for district leadership. And we all grow by learning about each other's cultures. So, sometimes it happens the opposite way. We also have a Chinese club that we all go to their celebration of Chinese New Year. It's just so much fun. We know that there's LGBTQ clubs that have started. And we know that there are parts of the world that still only have men in Rotary clubs. But, I think the idea is to reach out and to develop those relationships. Chances are, when we have the diverse populations coming to our countries, they already know what Rotary is. Their family were Rotary, they've participated in Rotary, or they've seen the results of a Rotary project in their community as well.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Valerie, I'm just going to ask one more question. I think we're running out of time. So this is really a combination of two questions from Stan and Suzanne. You mentioned the goal of bringing people along. What tips do you have for relating to Rotarians who believe Rotary should not be addressing this issue and who actively work to prevent Rotary from addressing DEI? And to follow with that, can you give examples of clubs and districts that have made it a priority to have diversity in their leadership?
Well, I think that your last part of that question speaks volumes. I think when we show representation and we show leadership, it changes the conversation. And we can even look to the Rotary International Board. I mean, 3 years ago, we didn't have a woman on the board. This year, we have 6 women on the board. And next year, we'll have 8, and Jennifer Jones being our president nominee, 9 out of 17. I mean, I can't celebrate this enough. That's gender parity for the first time in our organization. And think about what that says to every Rotarian and every young female leader out there. And so there are those who will put up roadblocks. There are those who think this is a political stance, which is why we need to stand behind that really important statement that Holger made. There are those who cannot put their stereotypes and their bias aside. I compare, do you remember when it became culturally unacceptable to smoke in public? It's a journey, and it gets to be to the point where people become uncomfortable. They become uncomfortable speaking up in a way that they used to feel comfortable speaking because we're not allowing them. We're respectfully being that upstander that says this is no longer acceptable in our organization. So is there a place for people in our organization who aren't willing to come along in this journey? That is a really big question. But I think that that's a personal choice. When we stop becoming uncomfortable, whether we're an underrepresented minority, we leave, right? So we need to change that culture for those people. And for the people who don't understand this journey, I'm not saying that they need to leave, but when they no longer become comfortable, then with the conversation and the way we serve, then maybe this organization is the future of this organization, and where we're going and where we need to be is not a place for those.
Great. I think we need to wrap it up, but I'm just going to ask one question because this actually hasn't been asked. Where have the LGBTQ clubs started? Are you aware of any?
Yes, I mean, I know that Brian Rush from California started an LGBTQ club. I know that we've had our first transgender president in Australia, I believe. So they, there's that, and of course there's the LGBT fellowship. I'm actually going to an event in Brazil tonight with the LGBT fellowship, and I'm looking forward to that. So yes, there's a number of clubs that have started that way.
So just one more question, and I'll let you have it, Kathy, because this is a good one. This is from Virginia. She heard that some Rotary clubs still don't allow female members. Is that true?
There are places in this world. Yes, there are.
Okay. All right. Valarie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, so much for curating the participant questions. And I'd like everyone to unmute so we can show our appreciation to Director Valarie for joining us today, for your insight and enthusiasm and leadership. We're very grateful to you.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And please know your allies in your efforts, or we are your allies and will be your allies, upstanders in the June 3rd. So we are with you all the way. And thank you for your